My name is Widianingrum. I am Mechanical Engineering student 2019, Sampurna University. In this video, I will explain my experiment about internal combustion engine on a car. Without any further ado, let's start the discussion.
Alright, for the objective of the experiment, internal combustion engine on a car has several objectives. The first one is to identify the behavior of a car engine and determine the factor efficiency that affect the power of a car. While the second one is to compare the power of a car from the experiment and the theoretical calculation. For the engine power from the experiment, it can be calculated using formula of drag force times velocity over the mechanical efficiency. While for the theoretical calculation, for the engine power from the theoretical calculation, it can be calculated using the formula of energy over time. In this experiment, the variable that need to be measured is the velocity of a car. For the velocity, it is measured when the car is in a constant speed. Next, for the equipment of this experiment consists of, the first is Xenia car 1300cc. It is as the object that the power will be measured. And the second one is stopwatch. This is used to record the time during the experiment, since this experiment is repeated several times. And the third one is the fuel. This is for the fuel for car when the experiment is conducted. And the last one is handphone. It is used for the documentation during the experiment. Alright, next is experiment settings. This experiment is conducted to measure the engine power on a car. Basically, to measure the engine power on a car, the car should have a constant speed. So, it needs to do the measurement on the highway or on the road without obstacle. But in this experiment, I decided to do the measurement on the highway. Before that, we need to prepare all of the equipments and make sure that the equipments work properly, especially for the car. After that, we can drive the car in a constant speed. In this experiment, requires two people, the first as the driver and the other as the recorder of the data. Since this experiment is conducted several times, we can record the velocity and RPM each 3 minutes. For the velocity and RPM, it can be seen from the speedometer of a car. After that, we can record the data to calculate the engine power from the experiment. For the next trial, we can repeat the step 1 to the step 4. Alright, let's start the experiment.
Hello everyone, this experiment is conducted to calculate the engine power on the car. So it needs to do the measurement on the highway to get the constant speed. Here we already on the highway, so let's start the experiment. For the first experiment, this is for the velocity is 60 km per hour and the RPM is 2750. After 3 minutes, we will record again the second experiment. For the second experiment, the velocity is 60 km per hour and the RPM is 3000 RPM. After 3 minutes from the second experiment, we will record the third experiment. The third experiment, the velocity is still the same, which is 60 km per hour, and the RPM is changes, which is 2750. After 3 minutes from the third experiment, we will record the fourth experiment. For the fourth experiment, the velocity is still same, which is 60 km per hour, and the RPM also the same, which is 2750 RPM. After 3 minutes from the fourth experiment, we will record the fifth experiment. For the velocity is still the same, which is 60 km per hour, and the RPM also the same, 2750 RPM. After 3 minutes from the fifth experiment, so we will record the last experiment, which is the sixth experiment. The velocity is same, which is 60 km per hour, and the RPM also same, which is 2750.
From the variable that is measured from the experiment, we can calculate the engine power. Before calculate the engine power, there are several assumptions. For the drag constant, it is equal to 0.44. For the mechanical efficiency, it is equal to 0.8. And for the air density, it is equal 1.165 kg per meter cubic. And for the area of vehicle, it is assumed that the area is 2.8 meters square. And the last is for the air-fuel ratio, it is 14.5 to 1. Alright, then first we can calculate the drag force. We can use this formula. From the experiment, we know that the experiment 1 to 6, the velocity remain constant, so the drag force is also the same. Then we can substitute the previous assumption for the rho. This is the rho, and this is the velocity from the experiment, and this is the drag constant, and this one is area. Then we can calculate the drag force, and the value is 199.34 Newton, or it is about 19.9 kilograms. And after obtaining the drag force, we can calculate the engine power from the experiment using this formula, which is drag force times velocity over the mechanical efficiency. For the mechanical efficiency, like the previous I mentioned before, that the value is 0.8, then we can calculate the engine power from the experiment is 4.153 kilowatt. Alright, after calculating the engine power from the experiment, we can compile all of the experiment data to the table that we have. Here is the data of the experiment. Here we have the velocity, RPM, drag force, air-fuel ratio, and also power engine. Here we know that the velocity is remain constant. For the RPM is also same, but except the second experiment, but it is not affected the value of drag force and also power engine. Alright, after conducting the experiment and also the analysis, we can conclude several points. The first one, we know that from the data of the experiment, 6 times of the experiment showed the same result in the engine power. It is because the velocity remained constant from the first until 6th experiment. And then the second one, since the engine power is same, so from the experiment we know that the engine power has 0% of error. And the third, we can conclude that if the experiment is carried out on the road that has obstacle or not in the highway, so it will affect the velocity of the car become not constant, and also the RPM of the car become unstable or fluctuating.
That's all from my video experiment. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.